Before I do the second run, let's now clear the console. Right click and say clear over here. All right, and then what we will do is if you go back to sequence app1 over here, remember there was only a single breakpoint we put around line number 10 over here for line number, right? In case you don't have the line number over here, you can show it. And this is how you show it. You'll see, remember the blue bar over here where we put a breakpoint? You simply right click on the blue bar over here. And then you can see over here, show line numbers. If you want to hide the numbers, you just uncheck it, right? No line number. And right click on the blue bar over here and then say show line numbers. That's how you show it, right? Very easy. Okay. I should have mentioned that earlier, but anyway, later better than never. Right, so now we are going to keep this original breakpoint, let's say, around the first line at the entry point of execution. So now let's launch the debugger again. Right, if you want to rerun the debugging session, you can simply just click on the button here, but just make sure that's really showing sequence app1 or whatever class you want to debug, right? Or I'm the more conservative person, so I will simply just right click on the class I want to debug and simply say debug as Java application, right? So now let's do the second run, which, okay, and then I didn't really click on remember my decision. I'll just leave it that way, okay, and then switch. All right, so now you can see we are now switched to the debug perspective again, right? You can easily go back to Java and then go back to debug, right? So I would say if you want to developing your code, stay in the Java perspective. And on the other hand, if you want to debug your code, you want to stay in the debug perspective, right? You want to have a separation of concern. It's always important. All right, so now before I move on, I want to show you a very quick practice run about what we're going to do, right? What's going to happen is this. We're still going to step over the first few lines. We start from here, right? We're going to step over, step over, step over, step over, and step over up to now, right? We're just reading input from the user. Now, when we actually, the blue arrow, right? Remember there's a blue arrow on the Eclipse that shows the current point of execution, right? So when we are at that point over there, we do not step over anymore. What we will do is we want to step into this particular execution of the method, right? And let's predict what's going to happen. Assuming that we're going to enter 3 over here and 2 over here, just as our common test case, we're going to put 3 here and 2 here. And then I'll say step into over here. What you will see in the debugger in Eclipse is we're going to switch the context from, the context used to be this main method over here. And now we're going to switch the context into this particular get sequence 1 method. Right? That's a very important point to note. We'll see that. And let's say once we switch the context to this particular method over here, what's going to happen is, remember ft is going to be 3 and also d is going to be 2, right? The common difference. And more precisely, what's going to happen is this. Every occurrence of ft is going to be replaced by 3. And every occurrence of d is going to be replaced by 2. And then when you actually try to actually step over each one of each line over here, where I want to step over this one, this one, this line, this line, this line, you're going to see these values 3 and 2 will be used to calculate turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accordingly, right? For example, turn 1 is actually going to be 3, right? Let's predict what's going to happen. And also turn number 2 is going to be 3 plus 2, which will be 5, and then 7, and then 9, and then 11. We'll double check this together in the Eclipse. Okay, and then when we step over to this line over here, we will see that we're going to combine turn 1, turn 2, 3, 4, and also 5 over here, and then concatenate the string together, and then the result is going to be whatever the sequence outcome we want. And then let's say when we are up to here, let's say once we are here, we don't really need to return over here. We can simply step out. And then once we step out, we're going to step out from here to the end of the method call over here. Which means the next point, the next action we can do is really to go from here to step over to the next line. Right? That's what we're going to see. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to you about what's going to happen. And then we can also try to step into sum 1 as well. That'll be 3 and 2. And if we say, let me just zoom out. If I say step into over here, the second instance of step into, I'm going to step into over here, and then this will be 3, and this will be 2 over here. And then we're going to calculate accordingly over here, right? I can also show this to you briefly, right? Just for completeness. All right, assuming that you're okay with what we're going to do, let's go back to Eclipse. I think the most important point you really want to understand is when you say step into here, you're going to switch the context from the main method over here to this particular get sequence 1 method whenever you want to say step into. That's the most important point. Let's now try it. Go back here. Okay, we're still in the debugger over here. Let's now, okay, again, let me remind you, when the blue arrow over here, there's a blue arrow right beside the breakpoint. So this is to say currently we are right in the beginning over here, right before. We haven't done it yet, but right before we try to execute this line over here. This is why you don't see the input under the variables over here. So these are all the variables that exist so far. All right, I'm going to say step over, right? Just be careful. This is step over, this is step into, right? Remember on the notes, I actually show you 1, 2, and 3, right? Remember. All right, let's now step over. Okay, so now it's right before we try to prompt the user, and then step over again. So now we're going to enter some number. So first term will be 3. And then we step over again. So this will actually store the 3 we just entered into FT. So that's why you see FT over here. That's 3, right? We already talked about this. I'm going to leave that to you. If you have doubts, you can refer to the previous part of this video. All right, I'm going to step over again. So we also enter the common difference. Let's enter that. Let's say 2 over here, enter. And then if we say step over again, so D has been set up properly. Very good. So now this is going to be the difference for the second run. We're now going to say step into. We're going to step into this particular call over here, right? So now you can see currently, where are we? You can see there is something called stack trace. This is a little bit more advanced, but try to understand as much as possible. So this is showing that we are now currently in the main method, right? As soon as we say step into, we're going to step into the context of get sequence 1, where FT would be, you can see FT currently, if you move your mouse over FT, it's going to show, okay, it should be showing up, but that's okay. You can see FT here is 3, and also D over here is 2, right? So these will be the 2 numbers you will see in the new context. Let's try that. All right, so now you're going to say step into over here. If you do that, right, so now we are in the context of get sequence 1, and guess what? FT over here is actually 3, and D over here is 2. We got 3 and 2. Exactly what I said on the paper, right? So you can see a very nice thing about debugger is whatever you reason about on the paper, it can be also done mechanically on the Eclipse. That's a very important tool for you to learn. That's why I'm introducing debugger in week number 2 right away. So later on, when we cover if statements, when we cover loops, when we cover 2-dimensional arrays, when we cover classes and objects, we're going to use debugger all throughout. So please don't skip this part of the tutorial videos. You really want to pick it up. It's going to benefit you for all the subsequent courses until even after you graduate. You can take my words for that. All right, so now let's take a look over here. So we are right before executing this line, so that's why you don't see any result over here under the variables, right? We only got FT, the parameter, and also D, the second parameter, only got FT and D, right? So now if you say step over, okay, be careful. Now you can see now you got all the 3 buttons enabled. You can either do step into, or you can do step over, or you can do step return or step out. We don't do step out just yet, right? So let's say step over. So now you can see the result over here is simply just empty string. That's why nothing is here printed out, right? So now we are now right before turn 1, which is actually assigned to FT. So if you say step over here, so you can see turn 1 has been set to 3. Exactly what we predicted, right? We said it should be 3. All right. And let me show you one more, then you will get an idea. So now I want to show you one more thing. You can see over here, we are now, you can see a blue arrow over here, right? You can see where my mouse is. That's the current point of execution. So now we're going to assign, before we haven't done it yet, but we're going to assign this particular expression FT plus D into turn number 2. I want to show you another very useful panel. Variables is very useful, but there's another thing that can be supplemented. If you go to expressions over here, again, if you don't have it, you can go to Window, Show View, and then you can go to expressions over here, right? You can find it very easily. Okay, so now basically you can put any expressions using the variable that are in the scope in the current context. For example, I want to know, before I do it, I want to know what's really the value I'm going to assign to turn 2. So for debugging purpose, this could be very valuable, because if somehow ft plus d is not equal to 5, that means there's something wrong with our calculation, right? So now over here, I can say ft plus d. Well, that tells me exactly 5. On the other hand, if you, let me try another one. If you say ft plus d2, and d2 does not really exist, in that case, it will tell you that it's error, right? So you have to use, you can also delete the expression over here. You have to use all the variables that actually exist in the scope of the current method in order to compose the expressions. All right, and then, so now we are now at a point that even before we try to reassign, we actually try to declare this variable turn 2, but we already predicts what's going to happen. We predicts ft plus d, the value 5 is going to be used to initialize the value for turn 2. Let's see if that's the case. So now I can say step over again. So now you can see turn number 2 over here is now 5, exactly what we expected, right? You can see 5 over here, right? Okay, just do one more. So now, right before I do this expression over here, I can simply copy it, right click, and then go to expressions, add a new expression. I can paste it, and then I know the value I'm going to use to initialize turn 3 would be 7, which is kind of expected, right? So now if I say step over, execute it, so now you can see not only that we introduce this variable here, but also it's 7, right? You get an idea. I'll let you do the rest. Okay, let's now move on. And now we can say step over, step over. You can see now we got turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The value is 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Exactly what we expected. And then you can see so far now it's right before we try to do result. And let me just copy this expression over here, the right hand side. Right click and then copy. Go to expressions over here. We can predict what's going to happen. Right click and paste. Enter. So that's the string value that we're going to assign to the left hand side over here, which is the result. Yeah, you really want to practice about how to use Debugger, right? That's why I really want you to learn about this tool. And then if I say step over, you can see result. Go back to variables over here. You can see the result. Oh, by the way, it also shows you exactly what's being changed. Let's say if you go from one tab back to the other, back to the variables, it will also show you what has been changed. It's very handy in Eclipse. Right? It shows you it's been 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. That's exactly right. All right, so now let's say as we said, so now we are up to this point over here, but we don't want to continue anymore. We just want to step out back to the end over here, right? How do we do it? So now we're gonna say step out or step return. The rightmost button here, step return. So now we are back to this line over here, but now think about conceptually, it's really at the end of this particular method call, right? So now if we go back here, you can see we are now exactly right before we try, we're not at the end of this line here. So now sequence has not been introduced just yet. However, as soon as we say step over once more, you can see the sequence has now been assigned, right? Okay, hopefully you see that. All right, now I want to show you one more thing here before I end this run. So now we are facing a choice. Do you want to step over from 26 to 27, like what we did in the first run, or do you want to see exactly how to get someone? This method here is working. If you, in which case you're gonna say step into. Let me show you. If you say step into over here, now what will be the context being shifted to? It will be shifted from the current method, which is main method, into the get someone method from sequence. If you do that, if you say step into the leftmost button here, then now you can see we switch to get someone over here, right? And then we're now right before executing line number 24. You can see we got FT, we got D as well, right? As before. I'm going to let you to step over one by one over here to see exactly how things work, especially how this sum is actually calculated. I'll let you can also try the expressions that I showed to you. So let's say I don't want to go step over anymore. I can simply say step out or step return. The rightmost button here, so it will be step return. So now I'm back to the end of this particular line over here, right the end of it. You can look at the cursor over here, right? So now if I say, you can see right now, it's now at the end of executing this line, sum, the variable is not here just yet. However, as soon as I say step over, you can see the sum has just been introduced, right? That's how things work. So now I'm done with the second run. So I don't necessarily have to go to the end every time. I can simply say stop over here, the red button here, terminates, and now I can switch back to the Java perspective, right? So that's the second run. Hopefully that also makes sense to you. You really want to compare how the first run I did over here. Let me summarize quickly. I still got one more thing to show you. You can see the first run, I simply go all the way to the end in the main method by stepping over. In the second run, when I actually go around here, I try to branch out to the calling of the method by stepping into the method over here. And then when I get to this point over here, I try to step out back to here. And then when I try to step over again, I go to the next line. And then for this line over here, I also try to step into this particular method over here. And then I'll try to go with as many lines as I like. And then I can step out back to the end of this line over here. And then when I say step over again, I'm going to go to the next line and next line over here. Right? Hopefully you can see the flow over here. All right. Let's see. Let's now run two more. And then very quickly, I want to show you how you can debug your JUnit test, because sometimes you might find that the errors occur because your JUnit test actually didn't pass, right? Let me show you exactly how you can launch the debugger with a JUnit test. The way to do it is, let me close all the files over here, right click and say close all. And then double click on test sequence over here, right? So now there is not a single point of execution, there's no main method. So what's going to happen is you have to choose which method you want to run the debugger with to run in slow motion. For example, let's say I want to test for get sequence version 2. Let's say I want to run this particular test method. Let's say for some reason I want to. And then what you do is you should really put a breakpoint. You can see the blue bar over here, right? The same as before. Put a breakpoint line 25 over here. Put it there. You can see the breakpoint. And then what we should do is you're going to right click and then debug as JUnit test rather than run as. If you say run as, it's going to bypass all the breakpoints. You're going to say debug as JUnit test. I believe if you look at the bug button over here, you also say debug test sequence as well. But again, it's kind of up to you. But for me, I kind of recommend you explicitly right click on the class. Either want to run or to debug, right? So right click on test sequence and then say debug as JUnit test. So you can see now, again, we're going to switch to debug perspective. Now you can see the blue arrow over here. We are pausing exactly at the point that we set a breakpoint, right? So now we got choices, right? You can see at this point, we haven't executed this line just yet. So that's why seq seq does not exist in the variables. So now let's say we don't want to step into. If you say step over here, if you say step over, so now you can see the seq over here got exactly the value that we expected. And now if you say assert equals, for assertions, typically you don't really want to step into, but you just want to run it, right? But now you can see this seq over here. If you want to, just for fun, you can see expression. By the way, all the previous expression there, since we are talking about different run, different costs, different methods, so these variables do not make sense anymore in the current method. You can either leave them in case you want to go back to that particular run later, or you can just delete them. Let me say I want to delete them. Choose all the three, and then you can say delete all. All right, so now let's put here. I want to put, for example, just seq over here, seq. That one is a sequence over here, right? You can either put a variable here, we can put whatever expression that makes sense in the current context. All right, so that's about this one here without stepping into, right? So this one here, let me just say very quickly, very similar idea. I don't need to bother you too much. You can see this one here, we're simply stepping over, and then that one is going to execute this block of code, get sequence 1 or get sequence 2, right? I'm just explaining to you conceptually. That one is going to execute this method here without pausing, and then we're going to execute this one as well, right? So now let's say we want to do step into. this particular execution of the method and go into it in a similar way as we did for the console application. Let's try that. Let's go back here. And now, so now you can see the blue arrow over here is exactly here, right before we try to execute assert equals. So now you can simply just say step over. If nothing goes wrong, you will just be able to reach to line number 27. If somehow the assertion fails, you're actually going to run into some error at the runtime. But that's something we'll show you maybe a little bit later in the tutorial. Let me stop here. Okay, and then please switch back to Java perspective. All right, let's now do one more, final run. I'm going to show you exactly how you can step into this particular sequence 2 execution. So now if I, again, I can either run the debug button here, or I can go back to Package Explorer, right click on the class and say debug as JUnit test. All right, and switch the debug perspective. So now what I want to do is, rather than stepping over like the previous one, now I want to step into. So now if I want to step into, let's predict what's going to happen. Most importantly, we're going to switch the context. Rather than simply test sequence 2, we're going to switch the context into get sequence 2 with ft being 3 and also the d being 2, right? Let's try that. If I say step into, you can see now we're in the get sequence 2 in this particular class, right? The class tab is also open. So now you can see ft over here. Let's go back to variables. You can see ft is 3 and d is 2. So now you can stepping over as far as you like. I can step over this the line we just executed, simply assign result to be empty to begin with. And then we're going to assign the sequence to be this particular expression, right? And then I can copy this expression over here. Let's just do that quickly. I can copy the entire expression over here without the semicolon, of course. Go to expression and put it here. So that's the sequence that's going to be assigned, right? Let's try that. And now if I say step over, you can see the sequence over here has been, go back to variables, the sequence has been assigned to this particular sequence, which is what we expected. However, remember, we're going to return the result, not really the sequence. So at the moment, result is still empty. So simply returning empty is not good. So that's why we kind of reassign the result to be sequence. So now if I say step over again, you can see now the result really has the right value for us to return, right? And let's say we don't want to return, we just want to step out. Click on maybe step out over here, we'll step return. So now we are back to the end of this particular line, right? The sequence is not there just yet, but if I say step over here, you can see the sequence here, right? Everything works. All right, so let me stop here and go back to Java perspective, right? Let me summarize to you. So it's very important for you to understand the current video and the previous one to really understand conceptually what the difference is between step over, step into, and also step out, right? So I try to illustrate to really use these kind of operation either in the context of some console application or in the context of some JUnit tests. In both cases, you're really trying to call some methods from the model package, right? The utility method. And in this case, you're also calling some method over here. So now you really want to understand conceptually how you can trace the program on a paper. That's very important, right? And then you can mechanize this particular 3 operations in Eclipse as well, as I showed to you in the current video. All right, try to review all these stuff before we go to the remaining part for this week. We're just going to write some small program by illustrating the syntax for selections or conditionals.